Most people think success belongs to the loudest person in the room, the most confident, the most charismatic, the most aggressive, the most emotionally expressive. But if you observe life carefully, really observe it, you begin noticing something strange. The people who truly win in life are often the calmest people in the room. Not passive, not weak, not emotionless, stable, and in a world addicted to emotional chaos. Stability becomes a form of power most people completely underestimate. Because emotional instability has become normal, people react before they think. They panic over silence. They crave validation from strangers. They destroy relationships over temporary feelings. They make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. They sabotage opportunities because their ego cannot tolerate discomfort. And then they wonder why life feels so heavy. Emotionally stable people move differently. When insulted, they do not collapse internally. When rejected, they do not lose their identity. When ignored, they do not chase. When betrayed, they do not become consumed by revenge. When life becomes uncertain, they do not emotionally drown. And because of that, they slowly become dangerous in ways most people cannot understand. Not dangerous through aggression, dangerous through control. Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Most people are not living consciously. They are simply reacting to fear, reacting to insecurity, reacting to loneliness, reacting to wounded pride, reacting to the desperate need to feel important. Their emotions control their choices control their future, and then they blame life for the consequences. But emotionally stable people interrupt this cycle. They feel emotion deeply, but they are not owned by it. That changes everything, because the greatest advantage in modern life is no longer intelligence alone. It is emotional regulation, the ability to remain internally steady while everyone else loses themselves emotionally. And the terrifying truth is, most people never develop it. You can see it everywhere. A man receives criticism online from someone he has never met, and it ruins his entire week. A woman feels ignored for a few hours, and suddenly questions her worth. Someone loses a relationship, and their entire sense of identity collapses because they built their emotional stability around another human being. Someone experiences failure once, and emotionally decides they are a failure forever. Human beings suffer more from emotional interpretation than reality itself. That is why emotionally stable people appear almost mysterious to others, because they do not react the way wounded people expect them to react. And wounded people are deeply confused by calmness, especially in conflict, especially in rejection, especially in emotional tension. There is something psychologically unsettling about a person who remains composed under pressure. Because emotional reactions are predictable, calmness is not. Imagine two men sitting across from each other during a heated argument. One raises his voice, interrupts constantly. His ego is bleeding through every sentence. He needs to dominate the conversation emotionally because internally he feels powerless. The other man barely changes his tone. He listens carefully, responds slowly. His emotions are present, but contained. And without realizing it, everyone in the room begins respecting the calmer man more, not because he is louder, but because emotional control signals inner security. Human beings instinctively trust emotional stability because stability feels safe, and safety is one of the deepest unconscious desires human beings carry. This is why emotionally unstable people often create chaos around them without understanding why. Their inner instability leaks outward into relationships, conversations, decisions, and environments. They overreact, overthink, overshare, overattach, overdefend, overexplain. Everything becomes emotionally exhausting. Meanwhile, emotionally stable people conserve energy, and energy conservation is one of the hidden keys to power. Because life is not won by the person who burns the brightest for 1 week. Life is won by the person who remains steady for decades. Most people are emotionally sprinting through life. Stable people endure, and endurance quietly defeats intensity almost every time. Nietzsche once wrote that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. Emotionally stable people understand this intuitively. They do not expect life to feel good all the time. They do not expect comfort constantly. They do not expect people to always understand them. They do not expect certainty from the future. And because their expectations are realistic, their emotional suffering decreases dramatically. This is something modern culture rarely teaches. People are taught to chase happiness obsessively, to avoid discomfort at all costs, and to treat every negative emotion as a crisis. But emotionally mature people understand something deeper. Pain is part of life. Uncertainty is part of life. Loss is part of life. Embarrassment is part of life. Rejection is part of life. Trying to eliminate all emotional discomfort only makes people weaker. Because emotional strength is not built through comfort, it is built through exposure. A man who has survived loneliness becomes harder to manipulate through abandonment. A person who has faced failure becomes less terrified of risk. Someone who has experienced betrayal becomes more observant of character. Suffering either matures you or emotionally fractures you, and the difference often comes down to whether you learn emotional stability during the process. There is a moment many people experience in silence but rarely talk about. Late at night. No distractions, no music, no notifications, no one texting, no external stimulation, just them and their own mind. For emotionally unstable people, silence becomes unbearable because silence exposes unresolved emotions. Regret, fear, insecurity, loneliness, self-hatred, shame. This is why so many people constantly distract themselves, not because they are happy, but because they are trying to escape themselves. Emotionally stable people eventually stop running from internal silence. They sit with it, study it, understand it, and slowly, their inner world becomes less chaotic. That is one of the hidden reasons emotionally stable people become attractive, not merely romantically, energetically. People feel calmer around them because stable nervous systems affect other nervous systems. Most people underestimate how psychological energy spreads socially. An emotionally unstable person can enter a room and infect everyone with anxiety. A stable person can enter the same room and reduce tension without saying much at all. Presence matters far more than people realize. This is why some individuals command respect without speaking loudly. Their emotional state communicates something powerful before words even begin. I am not easily shaken. That energy changes social dynamics instantly. And ironically, emotionally stable people often appear less desperate for approval because they are. Their self-worth is less dependent on constant external validation. That alone gives them an enormous advantage over emotionally dependent people, because dependency creates weakness. When your emotional state depends entirely on how others treat you, you surrender control over your inner world. Then your mood becomes controlled by text messages, attention, likes, approval, recognition, inclusion, rejection. You become emotionally programmable, and modern society profits from emotionally programmable people. Social media especially thrives on emotional instability. Outrage spreads faster than calmness. Insecurity sells faster than contentment. Comparison destroys emotional peace daily. People wake up and immediately consume images of other lives, then unconsciously feel inadequate before the day even begins. Emotionally stable people become extremely careful about what enters their mind because they understand something profound. Your environment slowly shapes your emotional baseline. If you surround yourself with chaos, you normalize chaos. If you surround yourself with emotionally reactive people, you slowly become reactive yourself. Humans absorb emotional habits from each other constantly. This is why stable people protect their peace almost ruthlessly, not because they think they are superior, but because they understand how fragile mental clarity can become in toxic environments. There is another uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Emotionally unstable individuals are often easier to manipulate. Fear manipulates them. Validation manipulates them. Loneliness manipulates them. Attention manipulates them. If someone desperately needs approval, they can be controlled through praise. If someone cannot tolerate abandonment, they can be controlled through withdrawal. If someone is emotionally impulsive, They can be controlled through provocation. Stable people are harder to manipulate because they pause before reacting. That pause changes everything. Between emotion and reaction, there exists a small space. Most people never notice it. Emotionally stable people live inside that space. That is where self-control exists. That is where wisdom exists. That is where freedom exists. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. External events are not fully controllable, but your response remains yours. Simple idea, extremely difficult practice, because human beings naturally want emotional relief immediately. We want to defend ourselves instantly. We want revenge instantly. We want comfort instantly. We want certainty instantly, but emotionally stable people tolerate emotional tension without impulsively escaping it. That ability alone changes careers, relationships, finances, and entire destinies. Think about how many lives are destroyed not by lack of intelligence, but by emotional impulsiveness. A single angry message, a single emotional affair, a single impulsive decision, a single moment of ego, a single uncontrolled addiction. Many people do not lose their lives dramatically. They lose them gradually, through repeated emotional weakness. And the frightening part is that society often rewards emotional instability temporarily. Explosive personalities attract attention. Emotional drama attracts engagement. Impulsiveness can appear exciting. But over time, stability wins. Always. The stable person builds slowly while others self-destruct repeatedly. And because the process is quiet, people rarely notice it happening until years later. Then suddenly one person has peace, healthy relationships, financial discipline, mental clarity, respect, self-respect, while another person remains trapped in cycles of emotional chaos. Same world, different inner foundation. Schopenhauer believed much of human suffering came from endless desire, always wanting, always craving, always emotionally attached to outcomes. Emotionally stable people slowly detach from this psychological addiction, not from life itself, but from emotional dependency on outcomes. They work hard, without emotionally collapsing if things fail. They love deeply without losing themselves completely. They pursue goals without tying their entire identity to achievement. This creates psychological resilience most people never develop, because emotional stability is not emotional numbness. That is an important distinction. Stable people still feel sadness, still feel grief, still feel anger, still feel disappointment, but emotions move through them instead of permanently controlling them. An emotionally unstable person becomes their emotion. A stable person observes emotion. Huge difference. One drowns, one navigates. And perhaps one of the most powerful signs of emotional stability is this: the ability to remain yourself when life stops rewarding you temporarily. Most people are emotionally confident only when circumstances are favorable, when they are praised, desired, successful, winning. But remove external validation, and suddenly their identity collapses. True emotional stability reveals itself during silence, uncertainty, rejection, failure, loneliness, and waiting. Especially waiting. Modern people have become psychologically intolerant of waiting. Waiting for success, waiting for love, waiting for clarity, waiting for healing. Everything must happen immediately, but emotionally stable people understand timing differently. They understand that meaningful transformation is slow. A tree does not panic because winter arrives. It understands seasons. Human beings forget this. They expect constant emotional summer. And when darkness appears, they assume something is wrong with their life. Sometimes nothing is wrong. Sometimes you are simply in a difficult season that is shaping you psychologically. There is a quiet strength that develops when someone stops resisting reality constantly. Not passive surrender, acceptance. Acceptance that people will disappoint you sometimes. Acceptance that life is unpredictable. Acceptance that you cannot control everything. Acceptance that some chapters must end. Acceptance that pain cannot always be avoided. Emotionally stable people stop arguing with reality. That alone removes enormous psychological suffering, because suffering intensifies when the mind constantly says, "This should not be happening." But life was never designed to obey human expectations. And ironically, the people who emotionally accept reality often become far more effective at changing their lives, because denial wastes energy. Acceptance creates clarity. Clarity creates intelligent action. This is why emotionally stable individuals often appear wiser with age, not because they learned every answer, but because they stopped emotionally fighting every uncomfortable truth. And perhaps nowhere is emotional instability more destructive than in relationships. Most relationships do not collapse because of lack of love. They collapse because of unresolved emotional chaos, uncontrolled insecurity, emotional immaturity, poor emotional regulation, fear of abandonment, ego battles, communication driven by wounded pride instead of understanding. Two emotionally unstable people can love each other deeply and still destroy each other completely, because love alone is not enough. Without emotional stability, love becomes possession, fear, control, dependency, projection. Many people do not love others. They emotionally cling to others to escape themselves. That is why loneliness terrifies them so deeply, because solitude forces self-confrontation. Emotionally stable people eventually become comfortable being alone. Not isolated, not emotionally shut down, just internally complete enough that solitude no longer feels like psychological death. And this changes relationships dramatically, because people who can emotionally survive alone make healthier decisions in relationships. They are less likely to tolerate disrespect out of desperation, less likely to manipulate, less likely to become emotionally obsessive. They choose more consciously. Desperation disappears, and desperation silently destroys dignity faster than almost anything else. You can always feel when someone desperately needs validation. It leaks through behavior, trying too hard, texting too much, explaining too much, seeking reassurance constantly, overreacting to emotional distance. People sense emotional dependency instinctively, and while compassion exists, respect often decreases when emotional self-control disappears completely. This is another uncomfortable truth about human psychology. People admire emotional strength more than emotional chaos, not perfection. Strength, the ability to remain grounded under pressure, the ability to think clearly while emotional storms are happening, the ability to protect others emotionally instead of infecting them with instability constantly. That kind of emotional presence becomes rare, especially today, and rare things become valuable. There is also a dark irony hidden inside emotional stability. The more emotionally stable you become, the less interested you often become in proving yourself. Because inner peace reduces ego desperation. You stop needing everyone to understand you. You stop chasing every argument. You stop needing revenge against every insult. You stop emotionally performing for approval. And this confuses people who are still psychologically trapped in ego battles. Because emotionally stable individuals no longer react predictably. Someone insults them expecting emotional chaos and receives calm detachment instead. Someone withdraws attention hoping to trigger desperation and receives silence instead. Someone attempts manipulation and realizes the other person is emotionally observant enough to notice it. This is why emotional stability quietly shifts power dynamics. Calm people become difficult to emotionally control, and emotionally uncontrollable people become extremely respected over time. Not always liked, but respected. There is a difference. Some people spend their entire lives trying to be liked. Emotionally stable people prioritize being internally aligned, and strangely, that often makes them more attractive socially anyway. Because authenticity has weight, especially in a world full of emotional performance. Many people are exhausted because they are constantly pretending to be confident, pretending to be happy, pretending not to care, pretending to be successful, pretending to feel emotionally okay. Meanwhile, their internal world is collapsing silently. Emotionally stable people eventually stop performing so much. They become more honest with themselves. And self-honesty is terrifying because it requires confronting uncomfortable truths. Maybe you are insecure. Maybe you are emotionally reactive. Maybe your ego ruins relationships. Maybe your need for validation controls your behavior. Maybe your anger hides pain. Maybe your arrogance hides fear. Most people avoid these realizations for years, but Jung believed that confronting the shadow is necessary for psychological wholeness. And emotionally stable people slowly learn how to face themselves honestly without self-destruction. That is real maturity. Not pretending to be perfect, not becoming emotionless, but developing enough awareness to recognize your darkness without becoming consumed by it. Most human beings are not destroyed by external enemies. They are destroyed by unconscious inner patterns, patterns they never examine. Emotional stability requires observation. You begin noticing your triggers, your insecurities, your impulses, your emotional habits. Then slowly, you stop automatically obeying them, and this process changes identity itself. Because emotionally unstable people often live in reaction mode. Someone else controls the emotional atmosphere, and they respond automatically. Stable people become internally anchored. Their emotional center comes more from within than from the outside world. That creates a kind of quiet freedom. Imagine waking up without immediately needing validation from the world, without needing everyone to approve of you, without obsessing over how you appear constantly, without emotionally collapsing because someone dislikes you. That freedom is priceless, and very few people achieve it fully because modern culture conditions emotional dependence constantly. Algorithms reward outrage. Advertising creates insecurity. Social comparison fuels inadequacy. Status obsession creates anxiety. People become psychologically addicted to external feedback. Then silence feels threatening. Emotionally stable people slowly detox from this addiction. And when they do, their mind becomes clearer. They think better, choose better, love better, work better, because emotional chaos consumes enormous cognitive energy. A distracted mind rarely builds a meaningful life. This is why stable people often appear disciplined, not because they never struggle emotionally, but because they are less controlled by temporary emotional states. They understand something many people never realize. You cannot build a strong future if your emotions constantly sabotage your consistency. Motivation fluctuates, emotions fluctuate. Circumstances fluctuate, but emotionally stable people learn to act intelligently even when emotions shift. That is where real power begins, not in intensity, in consistency. And consistency is deeply unglamorous, which is why most people avoid it. They want transformation to feel dramatic, exciting, instant. But most successful lives are built through emotionally stable repetition, small choices repeated for years, reading when no one sees it, working when motivation disappears, staying calm during pressure, walking away from toxic environments, choosing discipline over impulse repeatedly. Nothing cinematic in the moment, but eventually, the accumulated effect becomes extraordinary. There is another painful truth emotionally stable people eventually accept. Not everyone deserves access to you. This realization changes relationships permanently because emotionally unstable individuals often tolerate harmful people simply because they fear loneliness. Stable individuals become more selective. They understand that peace is expensive and the wrong people can destroy it quickly. Some individuals bring constant drama, constant emotional volatility, constant manipulation, constant instability. And emotionally mature people eventually realize compassion does not require self-destruction. You can understand someone's pain without allowing their chaos to consume your life. Boundaries become necessary, not cruel, necessary, because emotional stability is difficult to build and easy to damage. This is why emotionally stable people sometimes appear distant, but often they are simply careful about energy, careful about environments, careful about emotional influence, because they understand how deeply human beings affect one another psychologically. There is a reason ancient philosophies emphasized inner mastery repeatedly. The greatest battle has always been internal, against impulse, against fear, against ego, against emotional blindness. External success without internal stability eventually collapses. You see it constantly. People with fame who self-destruct. people with wealth who remain miserable, people admired publicly while emotionally broken privately, because external achievement cannot permanently stabilize an unstable inner world. Sooner or later, the internal chaos leaks outward, and this is perhaps the most misunderstood truth about emotionally stable people. Their peace was earned. Most calm people were not born calm. Life forced them to evolve. They experienced betrayal, loss, embarrassment, failure, heartbreak, loneliness, confusion, but instead of allowing suffering to make them bitter permanently, they became more conscious, more observant, more disciplined internally. Pain refined them instead of destroying them, and refinement changes energy completely. You can often sense when someone has suffered deeply but healed intelligently. They move slower, speak more carefully, react less impulsively, listen more, judge less, observe more. There is depth in them. Because emotional maturity often comes from surviving your own darkness, not avoiding it. The world desperately needs more emotionally stable people, people capable of remaining rational during fear, compassionate during conflict, grounded during uncertainty, disciplined during temptation, calm during emotional storms, because emotional stability is contagious too, just like chaos is. One grounded person can stabilize an entire family, an entire relationship, an entire workplace, sometimes even an entire generation, and perhaps that is the real reason emotionally stable people win in life. Not because life becomes easier for them, but because they stop making life harder through emotional self-destruction. They stop fighting themselves constantly. Their mind becomes an ally instead of an enemy. And once that happens, everything changes. Decisions become clearer, relationships become healthier, purpose becomes easier to pursue, suffering becomes more manageable, silence becomes less frightening. Life still hurts sometimes, but it no longer controls them completely. In the end, the people who truly win are not always the smartest, not always the richest, not always the most admired. Often, they are simply the people who learned how to remain internally steady while the world tried to shake them apart. And in an age where almost everyone is emotionally distracted, that kind of inner stability becomes a rare form of quiet greatness, because the strongest person is not the one who feels nothing. It is the one who feels everything and still chooses wisdom over reaction, still chooses discipline over impulse, still chooses peace over chaos, still chooses awareness over unconsciousness. And perhaps that is what real power has always been. Not controlling others, controlling yourself.